Jeffrey Epstein. Look, you hear that name and you immediately think predator. And you're not wrong. But there's another whole story here, one that's been hiding in plain sight. It's the puzzle of his wealth. I mean, it was immense and totally inexplicable. So in this explainer, that's what we're going to do. We're going to follow the money.
So let's just jump right in, because this is the question, isn't it? How did a college dropout with no real visible business somehow build a billion-dollar empire? I mean, seriously, forget the headlines for a second and just think about the numbers. They don't add up. So how on earth are we supposed to make sense of a fortune that basically materialized out of nowhere?
Well, to find the answer, you can't look at it the way most people do. You have to put on a different pair of glasses. We need to look at this whole thing through a money laundering lens. This isn't just a story about a predator. It's a story about the financial infrastructure that enabled him. We're going to break down the classic textbook red flags, the kind that any bank, any compliance officer really should have spotted from a mile away.
All right, Section 1, the billion-dollar mystery. And the subtitle here says it all. A lifestyle that didn't match the story. First, you really have to understand the scale of this. We're not just talking rich. We're talking about a lifestyle that was, well, it was beyond lavish. Think about it. A private island in the Caribbean, one of the biggest private mansions in all of Manhattan, a huge estate down in Florida, and, of course, a whole fleet of private jets, including that infamous one. To fund that kind of life, you need a massive and, more importantly, a verifiable source of income. You can't just wish it into existence.
Which brings us right to our second point, and our very first major red flag, this idea of a phantom fortune. You see, in the world of anti-money laundering, or AML as they call it, the first question you ask about any big client is super simple. What's your source of wealth? Basically, where did all this money come from in the first place? And with Epstein, that question hits a total brick wall, a complete dead end. And look at this comparison. It really lays out the huge gap between the story he told and, well, reality. The claim? Oh, he was a money manager for billionaires. Sounds impressive, right? But the reality? There's absolutely no public record of any funds he managed. He called himself a financial genius, but there were no audited returns, no clear list of clients. In the real financial world, that's not just weird. It's basically impossible. You can't operate at that level and be a ghost. This isn't just a red flag, it's a giant, flashing neon sign. Okay, so the money's a mystery. Now let's move on to the next piece of the puzzle, because it's not just about the money itself. It's about who he's surrounded himself with. His network. I mean, it was like a who's who of global power. We're talking presidents, royalty, prime ministers, the biggest names in business. This is another huge red flag. Now, in the world of finance, there's a term for these powerful people. They're called politically exposed persons, or PEPs, and banks get really nervous about them because their influence opens the door to stuff like bribery and corruption. Now, Epstein himself wasn't a politician, right? But he was what we call PEP adjacent. He was constantly next to them, and that proximity to power, it automatically puts you in a high-risk bucket. Any bank dealing with him should have been all over his accounts with extra scrutiny. All right, so let's recap. We've got a phantom fortune and super high-risk connections. So where do you put all that sketching money? Well, that takes us to our next red flag, the offshore maze. This is classic. Epstein used this incredibly complex web of shell companies, trusts, and bank accounts, all based in places that are famous for financial secrecy, like the U.S. Virgin Islands. Structures like this are pretty much designed for one thing, to make money impossible to trace. And this whole setup is a textbook example of a money laundering technique called layering. Think of it like this. You're trying to hide a single drop of red dye in a swimming pool. You move the water from bucket to bucket, through pipes and filters, until you can't tell where that red drop came from. That's layering. You move the dirty money through so many accounts and companies that its origin gets totally lost. Epstein's financial world wasn't just complicated by accident. It was engineered to be opaque. For any bank, this should have set off alarm bells like crazy. So how did he actually use all this hidden money? Well, that brings us to another red flag, laundering with luxury. You see, the money wasn't just sitting in offshore bank accounts. It was hanging on his walls, parked in his driveway. It was literally in his living room. And here's why that's so important. Luxury goods, art, real estate, jewels, they're a money launderer's dream come true. Why? Because their value is totally subjective, the sales are private, and you can move them across borders without much trouble. And that's the key thing to understand here. These things, the expensive art, the private islands, the multi-million-dollar mansions, they weren't just trophies to show off how rich he was. No, they were potential tools. Think about it. You can buy a weird painting for $2 million with dirty money. Then you sell it a year later to a friendly buyer for $5 million. What do you have? You have $3 million in clean profit from an art investment. See how that works? He wasn't just collecting stuff. He was potentially cleansing his cash.
Okay, let's take a step back and look at the whole picture. When you put all these pieces together, it's just overwhelming. Any one of these red flags on its own, the mystery money, the powerful friends, the offshore maze, is a huge problem. But when you see them all wrapped up in one person, you've got a perfect storm of financial crime. But there's still one crucial piece of the puzzle we haven't talked about yet. And here it is, the final and most important piece. It's called the predicate offense. It's a technical term, but it means something really simple. Money laundering needs a crime to create the dirty money. It doesn't just happen. You have to have an underlying criminal activity that's generating the cash. And in Epstein's case, we know what that horrific crime was: human trafficking. That was the engine. And if you're a bank, this is where the picture should have become crystal clear. You'd see these patterns of really suspicious transactions. We're talking about tons of regular cash withdrawals, repeated payments going out to dozens and dozens of young women who had no clear reason to be on a payroll, money for travel, for tuition, for lavish gifts. This isn't just someone being weird with their money. This is the financial footprint of the crime itself, playing out right there in the bank statements. So just look at this checklist. It lays it all out. Unexplained wealth? Big check. High-risk connections to powerful people? Check. A maze of offshore companies designed for secrecy? Yep, check. Using luxury toys to move and hide value? Check. And finally, a clear, horrific predicate offense generating the dirty money? A massive check. This is literally a textbook case study. It's what they teach you to look for. So that leads to the million-dollar question, right? If all the signs were this obvious, how on earth did the system fail for so long? And the answer is, well, it's a mix of secrecy, prestige, and good old-fashioned intimidation. He used his power to gain the system. His reputation gave him cover. His lawyers buried everything in secrecy, and his powerful friends created this atmosphere where nobody wanted to be the one to ask the tough questions. And really, that's the core lesson here. This quote says it all. In financial crime, the red flags are always there. You just have to see them. For anyone who works in finance, for regulators, and honestly, for all of us, the big takeaway is that the warning signs for this kind of stuff are almost never invisible. They're just ignored, or they're explained away, or they're hidden behind a wall of power and influence that people are too afraid to look behind. And that leaves us with a pretty chilling thought to end on. The Epstein case was basically a masterclass in what money laundering looks like in the real world. So, knowing everything we know now, the really scary question isn't just how did he get away with it? It's who else is getting away with it right now? If the warning signs can be this clear, what are we all still missing today?